Hello, I'm Bruce McCaber with Bee Clean Specialties, and this is Scott. We've both been servicing electrostatic air cleaners for many years, and we just wanted to go over common problems we have with electrostatic air cleaners. A lot of times the problems aren't with the air cleaner themselves. Like this unit here is a very good unit, used in hot spots around the factory, and most of the problems we find are not with the unit, but actually with how the filters were cared for or installed. You remember those kind of issues?
Yeah, or if they're not cleaned properly, they're still dirty. If your unit checks out but the filters aren't clean, it still is going to allow some blow through.
Yeah, so I have an ionizer here that pulled out one unit, and it's still dirty on this plate here. It inhibits the flow of electricity from your ionizing wire to the ground. And while it's moderately clean, that will probably reduce efficiency by 20%.
If the wires are dirty too, the coating on those wires will insulate the spread of electrons to make it not as effective.
Yeah, the other thing we find is sometimes filters are a little bit damaged, like this one here is going to cause arcing there, and it's also missing this ionizer wire. Each wire is good for about 10% of efficiency. We also come across cells that look like this, that are all bent. This one got labeled as being quite bent up, and we would have to replace about half these plates to get this one functional again.
Because it might hold a charge when it's clean, but with the bent plates like that, once it starts to get dirty, you'll get arcing in between the plates. So it might initially seem okay, but arcing will further damage the cell and allow blow through.
Another problem that's common with this brand here is it's a trimest. It gets loose plates. There's not much holding them onto the rod that holds the plates apart, and if that plate starts fluttering in the breeze, it'll arc, and your efficiency drops to about 0. So that's one thing to watch for if you've got loose plates, especially trimest brand.
This plate is ground, and this other one's got 6,000 volts, and so if it's too close, it'll start arcing. So make sure when you're handling them that your plates are all evenly spaced and you don't smash them.
The spacing between the cell plates is about 1/4 inch. If you get to 3/16 of an inch, it'll usually start to arc, so it's very critical that they're nice and straight. Those are problems we find with how they're cared for and cleaned. And other problems we find is when they're installed into the unit itself. Sometimes we find them upside down like this one. Well, that still looks good, doesn't work at all. Should be keeping in mind that in the back of this unit and in most units, there's a set of contacts, one for your ionizer and one for your cell. And filters have to connect to it. The other problem is the cell can be in upside down or backwards, and it too has a contact on the back that must line up with the spring on the ceramic contact at the back of the unit. On the SG series, the contacts are on the door, but it's still an issue. You can have them in the wrong spot and not connect. So when you close the door, you need to make sure that the springs are in alignment with your contacts.
And on a bigger unit, there'd be a spring in between each cell and ionizer, and you gotta make sure that it's there and then it's in the right spot. Otherwise, one cell won't work, just the one that's getting contact will work.
And then when you're got everything in there correctly and you've got good voltage on your parts, and you go and close the door and the light goes out or it doesn't work, it can be the fact that these push test buttons stay stuck in. And on the back side of the push to test button, there's a copper strip that shorts the cell and ionizer to ground. And sometimes this button stays stuck in, and then the copper strip does its job and shorts out the cell, causing your unit to not work. Almost all brands have a safety switch. When this door gets closed on the unit, it engages that switch and turns your power supply on, so that when you open the door, the power turns off. On some brands, though, that switch doesn't always like to be depressed by the door when you close it. That will mean you got everything in there correct, but your power supply won't light up. It's an easy fix, so always check to make sure that switch is depressed. In a quiet plant, you can hear it click. In a noisy plant, you can't, so you can ohm check it if you need to. That's problems with installation and service. There's other problems that relate to the unit itself, and often we find that there's power supplies that go bad. While they do sometimes last 10 to 20 years, they're a little bit like a light bulb and go out.
It's electronics nowadays, so if there's a low capacitor or resistor in there goes bad, or often it's the internal transformer that goes bad in the power supply.
So the main thing you gotta check for is that you've got power going in, and then with the leads attached, you have power coming out. On this one, you can visually see that it went bad by carbon tracking across the end from the high voltage to ground. Other problems are that they often hide your high voltage contacts at the back of the unit, and they're hard to see and hard to get to, and as they get dirty, they can get carbon across there that shorts the high voltage to ground.
You often notice that problem if your light is flickering or it's not steady light. It's not voltage shorting across from the spring to the cabinet of the unit.
Other problems we find with the unit itself, when the high voltage system is working correctly but you're not moving any air through the system, is that you can have a bad or loose drive belt. On this unit, it's got a drive belt. Tri-mist air cleaner, there's a fan on the top of the air cleaner, same with a mist buster. The bearings on those go bad over time, and while it takes a while to go bad, we usually find that the switches often go bad at the same time. So you have a fan that has drawn too much power because the bearings are going bad, and it melts up the contacts in your switches. So oftentimes you replace the fan and find you also have a bad switch to replace. Another problem we find is when they're working in the factory, they change the phases to your air cleaner, and your fan may be running, but if it's going in the wrong direction, you'll move about 10 to 15% of the total volume of air. So instead of 2,000 CFM, you might be moving 400 CFM, and you just need to change the phases.
On a squirrel cage blower and like a smog hog like that, if the wheel is off center a bit, it reduces the airflow as well. It seems like it's not that big of a deal, but if it's off center one way or the other, you get feedback and the air doesn't move as much.
Yeah, that's correct. The other thing is if you do have a loose belt and you replace the joke and it's still loose, you need to check to make sure your shaft isn't worn. A worn shaft will create a loose belt, and then when you just tighten that belt back up, it will create even further problems for your shaft and bearing. Those are most of the common problems we've found. There's still a lot more rare ones, but those are what we see every day as we go out and service electrostatic air cleaners.
You still can't figure it out, give us a call, we'd be happy to help.